The cold wind howled through the dark alleys of the city as Maya clutched a brown paper bag close to her chest. The old winter coat she wore barely provided any warmth against the biting night air. But she didn't care. Her focus was on the figure huddled against a brick wall near the bus stop. He was there every evening, wrapped in layers of tattered clothing, his head bowed against his knees as if trying to disappear into the pavement. Tonight was no different, except it was. Maya hesitated for a moment, glancing over her shoulder. Her mother had warned her not to linger outside too long after dark. Their neighborhood was not the safest, and a 12-year-old girl wandering around at night was bound to attract trouble. But she had made a promise, even if it was unspoken. She stepped closer, her boots crunching against the frozen sidewalk. The man did not move. Maya had seen him plenty of times before. Other kids at school called him a ghost, a shadow, a nobody. Adults walked past him like he was invisible. But to Maya he was real, and no one deserved to be ignored like that. She knelt beside him and carefully placed the warm sandwich on the ground near his hands. For a moment nothing happened. Then slowly he raised his head. His eyes startled her. They were sharp, piercing, not the dull, vacant gaze she was used to seeing in people who lived on the streets. There was something in them, something that flickered between exhaustion and deep intelligence. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice hoarse from the cold. Maya swallowed. "Neither should you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He shifted slightly, pulling the sandwich toward him. "You keep bringing me food," he said. "Why?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Because you need it." The man stared at her for a long time before turning his attention to the sandwich. His hands were weathered, the veins standing out against his skin, the fingernails chipped and blackened. He unwrapped the sandwich slowly, as if savoring the moment before he even took a bite. Maya hugged her arms around herself. "Do you have a name?" The man chewed thoughtfully before responding. "Joe." Maya tilted her head. "Just Joe." He nodded. "Well, Joe, I'm Maya." She held out a hand. Joe looked at it, then at her. He didn't shake her hand, but he nodded in acknowledgement. It was enough. Over the next few weeks, Maya continued bringing him food. Sometimes, she'd sit with him for a while, talking about nothing and everything. Joe never said much about himself, but she caught glimpses of something deeper in his words, something that made her wonder. One night, as she handed him a fresh meal, a group of boys from her school walked by. They stopped, watching her with a mix of amusement and disgust. "Why waste food on him?" one of them sneered. "He's just a drunk." Maya clenched her fists, anger bubbling inside her. "He's not just some guy. But she stopped herself. She didn't know what to say. What was he, really? The boys laughed and walked away, their taunts lingering in the air. Maya turned back to Joe. He was staring at her, his expression unreadable. "They don't see what you see," he murmured. Maya sat down beside him. "And what do I see?" Joe sighed, looking out at the city lights. A person. Silence stretched between them. Maya watched as he pulled his coat tighter around himself. The air smelled of rain, the kind that would turn to ice before morning. That was the first time she heard him mutter something strange. "They don't deserve my fortune." She frowned. "What did you say?" Joe shook his head. "Nothing," but Maya knew it wasn't nothing. She started to pay more attention after that. Joe's words, his mannerisms, the way he carried himself. He wasn't like the other homeless people she had seen. He was different, and it wasn't just the way he spoke. It was the way he looked at the world, the way he moved, as if he didn't belong there. Then, one night, it happened. "Joe," she asked hesitantly as they sat together on the curb, "what happened to you?" He was quiet for a long time. The city buzzed around them, cars speeding by, the distant hum of music from a bar down the street. Finally, he exhaled and looked at her. "They think I'm dead." Maya's breath caught in her throat. "Who?" Joe didn't answer. He just looked away, his jaw tightening. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. Something told her that this was more than just a story of bad luck or poor choices. Joe wasn't just a homeless man. He was someone who had disappeared, and someone out there still believed he was gone. Maya sat on her bed, her fingers trembling as she typed the words into the search bar. "Missing billionaire." She hesitated for a second before pressing enter. The screen filled with articles, news reports, and old photographs. Her eyes darted across the headlines. "Joseph Langston III, heir to Langston Industries, disappears without a trace." Maya clicked on the first article. A photograph appeared at the top of the page. A man in a sharp suit with neatly combed hair, standing in front of a mansion with marble columns. He looked polished, confident, and powerful. Nothing like the man she had been sharing sandwiches with for the past few weeks. But she knew. The sharp eyes, the familiar jawline, the slight crease between his brows. It was him. Her stomach twisted. She scrolled through the article, absorbing the details. Joseph Langston III had gone missing 10 years ago. His family assumed he had been kidnapped or worse. Investigations had been launched. Rewards had been offered. But as the years passed with no sign of him, the world eventually moved on. The Langston Empire was now controlled by his younger brother, and Joseph Langston had become a mystery, a ghost. Except he wasn't. He was sitting outside the bus stop every night, eating the food she gave him, wearing clothes that barely shielded him from the cold. Maya closed her laptop, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. She had to talk to him. The next evening, as she approached his usual spot, Joe was already waiting. He looked at her the moment she walked up, as if he knew something had changed. "You know," he said before she could speak. Maya sat down beside him. "You're Joseph Langston," she said. It wasn't a question. Joe sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Once upon a time, yeah." Maya's mind was spinning. "But why?" she blurted out. "Why are you here? Why did you leave?" Joe didn't answer right away. He leaned back against the wall, his breath visible in the cold air. "Because I had everything," he finally said, "except the one thing that mattered." Maya frowned. "What do you mean?" Joe glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You ever heard the saying that money can't buy happiness?" She nodded slowly. "Well, I tested that theory," he said. "And turns out it's true." Maya listened in silence as he told her his story. 10 years ago, he had been the golden boy of the Langston family. His father had built an empire, and Joe was expected to carry the torch. Every decision he made was scrutinized. Every move was planned. He had money, power, status. People envied him, respected him, but they didn't love him. His parents only cared about the company. His so-called friends only cared about what they could get from him. He had been surrounded by people but had never felt more alone. One day it became too much. "I just walked away," he said. "No goodbyes, no plans. Just left." Maya tried to wrap her head around it. "But why live like this?" she asked, gesturing to his worn-out clothes and the empty streets. Joe smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Because freedom comes at a price," he said. And this was the only way I could be truly free. Maya stared at him, processing his words. It made sense in a way, but at the same time it didn't. Your family thinks you're dead, she said quietly. Joe nodded. Good. A shiver ran down Maya's spine. But they're still looking for you, she said. There's a reward. $10 million. Joe didn't even flinch. I know. Maya felt torn. She thought of her mother, working double shifts just to keep a roof over their heads. $10 million could change their lives forever. But then she looked at Joe. She had seen how people treated him, how they walked past him as if he didn't exist. He had chosen this life, but maybe it had chosen him too. And she wasn't sure if dragging him back to his old world was the right thing to do. That night, she barely slept. The next day, as she walked toward the bus stop, her heart nearly stopped. A sleek black car was parked near Joe's usual spot. A man in a dark suit stood outside, scanning the area, his sharp eyes searching for something. Or someone. Maya's pulse pounded in her ears. Someone was looking for Joe. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, trying to act casual. Joe wasn't there yet. If he showed up now, he'd walk right into them. The man's gaze flicked toward her. Excuse me, he said, stepping closer. His voice was smooth, controlled. Have you seen this man? He held up a photograph. It was Joe. Maya's throat went dry. She forced herself to look at the picture as if she had never seen it before. No, she said, shaking her head. Sorry. The man studied her for a moment before nodding. All right. If you do, there's a reward for any information. Maya nodded quickly and walked away. She had to find Joe before they did. The next morning, Joe was gone. Maya arrived at the bus stop as usual, her heart still racing from the encounter with the suited man the night before. But as she looked around, panic began to creep into her chest. Joe's usual spot was empty. The old blankets, the small pile of discarded newspapers, even the worn-out coffee cup he sometimes held between his hands for warmth. Everything was gone. She spun around, searching the street. Maybe he had moved to another spot. Maybe he had just gone somewhere else for a while. But deep down, she knew. Someone had found him. Her hands clenched into fists as she replayed last night's conversation with the man in the suit. Had he followed her? Had he seen something in her face that gave her away? She had lied. She had protected Joe. But had it been enough? Maya took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She needed to find him. For days she searched. She checked the alleys, the soup kitchens, the shelter downtown. She asked the few homeless people she had seen him speak to before, but no one knew anything. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. A week passed. Maya refused to give up. She sat at the bus stop every evening, hoping he would return. The city lights blinked in the distance. Cars sped by. Life continued as usual. But Joe was gone. Then, on the 8th day, something arrived in the mail. Maya's mother called her from the kitchen, waving an envelope. No return address, just her name scrawled in shaky handwriting. Maya's hands trembled as she took it. She tore it open, her breath hitching as she unfolded the letter inside. Maya, you were the only one who saw me as a person, not a fortune. That's why I leave mine to you. A second piece of paper slipped out of the envelope. It was an official legal document. A will. Maya blinked, her brain struggling to process what she was looking at. Joe had rewritten his will, and he had left his entire estate to her. She sat down hard on the kitchen chair, her mother hovering over her with a concerned look. Maya couldn't speak, couldn't think. The words on the paper blurred in front of her eyes. Joe was gone, but he had left her everything. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Lawyers showed up at her doorstep. Bankers, financial advisors, reporters. The media caught wind of the story. A missing billionaire found living on the streets, leaving his entire fortune to a 12-year-old girl. It was chaos. Maya didn't know what to do with it all. The money, the property, the company shares. It was too much. Too big. She was just a kid. And then she remembered Joe's words. They don't deserve my fortune. But she did. Not for herself. Not to live in a mansion or buy expensive things. But because she had seen what Joe had seen, the people society ignored. The ones who were invisible. She made a decision. Instead of keeping the billions for herself, Maya used it to help others, just as she had once helped Joe. She built shelters, funded food banks, created programs to help people get back on their feet. She made sure no one had to feel invisible again. And Joe's name would never be forgotten. Years later, as Maya stood in front of the grand opening of the Langston Foundation for the Homeless, she felt him beside her. His presence, his spirit. He had disappeared, but his legacy, their legacy, would live on. Maya smiled. Sometimes the greatest wealth wasn't in money. It was in kindness, and the way it could change the world. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to support more powerful storytelling like this. And don't stop there. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next video. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below to let us know how this story impacted you or what you'd like to see next. Your feedback helps us create meaningful content that connects with you. Thank you for being a part of our community. Your voice matters.